Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Black-eyed kids, sometimes called black-eyed children or BEK, are said to be children with eyes that are solid black, with no differentiation between sclere, pupil, or iris. Those who report encounters with them often feel that the children were somehow supernatural and very dangerous. The first known sighting was recounted in a 1997 Usenet posting by journalist Brian Bethel. In his initial post, Brian Bethel reported of a meeting with two unusually confident and eloquent children who attempted to talk him into giving them a ride in his car. Bethel said in his post that he nearly opened the door to admit the children, even though he found them vaguely unsettling, until he realized that their eyes were completely black, with no iris or sclere. He reports that, as soon as he realized this, the children became angry and insistent, and he drove away quickly. His posting implies that the children may have been using some form of low-level mind control to induce him to open the car door. Since Bethel's original post, there have been other reports of similar experiences in other parts of the country. These accounts are similar to Bethel's in that they generally involve the children's request that the person let them inside their car or house, frequently using an excuse such as "I need to get home to my mother," or something that implies the child is in need of assistance. Experiences involving the black-eyed children generally do not explain the cause of the children's eye color, not to be confused with aniridia, which is the lack of iris. Black-eyed children have no sclere or white either, or the origins of the children themselves. Some imply they could be ghosts or demons, specifically vampires. The encounters frequently emphasize that the children must be voluntarily admitted or invited into the house or car in question, and in this way are reminiscent of some vampire legends. Black-eyed car encounter. First account, mentioned above. I don't really know what I'd call this story if I was submitting it for publication in Fate or something of its ilk. Brian versus the Evil. Black-eyed, possibly vampiric or demonic, but at least not bloody normal kids doesn't have much of a ring to it. But that's at least an accurate title, as so many things do. It all started out innocently. My internet service provider used to have offices in a shopping center before they moved to their comparatively lush accommodations elsewhere. There was a drop box at that original location. The monthly bill was due, and thus, there but for the grace of the net I went. It was about 9:30 p.m. when I left from my relatively isolated apartments. It's about 15 minutes or so to downtown. Abilene has a population of about 110,000. Right next to Camelot Communications' old location is a $1.50 movie theater. At the time, the place was featuring that masterwork of modern film, Mortal Kombat. I drove by the theater on the way into the center proper and pulled into an empty parking space, using the glow of the marquee to write out my check. I was startled to hear a knock on the driver's side window of my car. I looked over and saw two children staring at me from street. I need to describe them with one feature. You can guess what it was that I didn't realize until about halfway through the conversation, cleverly omitted. Both appeared to be in that semi-mystical stage of life children get into where you can't exactly tell their age. Both were boys, and my initial impression is that they were somewhere between 10 to 14. Boy 1 was the spokesman. Boy 2 didn't speak during the entire conversation, at least not in words. Boy 1 was slightly taller than his companion, wearing a pullover, hooded shirt with a sort of gray checked pattern, and jeans. I couldn't see his shoes. His skin was olive-colored and had curly, medium-length brown hair. He exuded an air of quiet confidence. Boy No. 2 had pale skin with a trace of freckles. His primary characteristic seemed to be looking around nervously. He was dressed in a similar manner to his companion, but his pullover was a light green color. His hair was a sort of pale orange. They didn't appear to be related, at least directly. Oh, great, I thought. They're gonna hit me up for money. And then the air changed. I've explained this before, but for the benefit of any new lurkers out there, right before I experienced something strange, there's a change in perception that comes about which I describe in the above manner. It's basically enough time to know it's too late. So, there I was, filling out a check in my car which was still running, and in a sudden panic over the appearance of two little boys. I was confused, but an overwhelming sense of fear and unearthliness rushed in nonetheless. The spokesman smiled, and the sight for some inexplicable reason chilled my blood. I could feel fight or flight responses kicking in. Something I knew instinctively was not right, but I didn't know what it could possibly be. I rolled down the window very slightly and asked yes. The spokesman smiled again, broader this time. His teeth were very white.
Hey, mister, what's up? We have a problem.
He said. His voice was that of a young man, but his diction, quiet, calm, and something I still couldn't put my finger on, made my desire to flee even greater.
You see, my friend and I want to see the films, but we forgot our money. We need to go to our house to get it. Want to help us out?
Okay, journalists are required to talk to lots of people. And that includes children. I've seen and spoken to lots of them. Here's how that usually goes. Mister, can I see that camera? I won't break it or anything. I promise. My dad has a camera. And he lets me hold it sometimes, I guess, and I took a picture of my dog. It wasn't very good, 'cause I got my finger in the way and add in some feet shuffling or body swaying, and you've got a typical kid talking to a stranger. In short, they're usually apologetic. People generally teach children that when they talk to adults, they're usually bothering them for one reason or another, and they should at least be polite. This kid was in no way fitting the mold. His command of language was incredible, and he showed no signs of fear. He spoke as if my help was a foregone conclusion. When he grinned, it was as if he was trying to say, I know something, and you're not going to like it. But the only way you're going to find out what it is will be to do what I say. Was the best reply I could offer. Now here's where it starts to get strange. The quiet companion looked at the spokesman with a mixture of confusion and guilt on his face. He seemed in some ways shocked. Not with his friend's brusque manner, but that I didn't just immediately open the door. He eyed me nervously. The spokesman seemed a bit perturbed, too. I still registered something wrong with both.
Come on, mister.
The spokesman said again. Smooth as silk. Car salesman could learn something from this kid.
Now, we just want to go to our house. And we're just two little boys.
That really scared me. Something in the tone and diction again sent off alarm bells. My mind was frantically trying to process what it was perceiving about the two figures that was wrong. Was all I could manage. I felt myself digging my fingernails into the steering wheel.
What movie were you going to see?
I asked finally. Mortal Kombat. Of course, the spokesman said. The silent one nodded in affirmation, standing a few paces behind. Oh, I said. I stole a quick glance at the marquee and at the clock in my car. Mortal Kombat had been playing for an hour. The last showing of the evening. The silent one looked increasingly nervous. I think he saw my glances and suspected that I might be detecting something was not above board.
Come on, mister, let us in. We can't get in your car until you do, you know.
The spokesman said soothingly, just let us in. And we'll be gone before you know it. We'll go to our mother's house. We locked eyes. To my horror, I realized my hand had strayed toward the door lock and was in the process of opening it. I pulled it away, probably a bit too violently, but it did force me to look away from the children. I turned back. I offered weakly, and then my mind snapped into sharp focus. For the first time, I noticed their eyes. They were coal black. No pupil. No iris. Just two staring orbs reflecting the red and white light of the marquee. At that point, I know my expression betrayed me. The silent one had a look of horror on his face in a combination that seemed to indicate the impossible had just happened. We've been found out. The spokesman, on the other hand, wore a mask of anger. His eyes glittered brightly in the half-light.
Simon, mister, we won't hurt you. You have to let us in. We don't have a gun.
That last statement scared the living hell out of me. Because at that point, by his tone, he was plainly saying,
We don't need a gun.
He noticed my hand shooting down toward the gear shift. The spokesman's final words contained an anger that was complete and whole, and yet contained in some respects a tone of panic. We can't come in unless you tell us it's okay. Let us in. I ripped the car into reverse. Thank goodness no one was coming up behind me, and tore out of the parking lot. I noticed the boys in my peripheral vision, and I stole a quick glance back. They were gone. The sidewalk by the theater was deserted. I drove home in a heightened state of panic. Had anyone attempted to stop me, I would have run on through and faced the consequences later. I bolted into my house, scanning all around, including the sky. What did I see? Maybe nothing more than some kids looking for a ride. And some really funky contacts. Yeah, right. A friend suggested they were vampires. What with the old let us in bit and my compelled response to open the door. That and the "we'll go see our mother" thing. I'm still not sure what they were. But here's an epilogue I find chilling. I talk about Chad a lot. He's still my best friend, my best ghost hunting companion, and an all-around cool guy. He recently moved to Amarillo, but at the time this happened was still living in San Angelo of Rampage fame. I called him and talked to him briefly. He had 2 female friends with him at the time, both professing some type of psychic ability. I started telling him the story, leaving out the part about the black eyes for the kicker. One of the women, we were on speakerphone, stopped me.
These children had black eyes, right? I mean, all black eyes.
Yes, I said. I was a bit taken aback.
One night last week, I had a dream about children with black eyes. They were outside my house, wanting to be let in, but there was something wrong with them. It took me a while to realize it was the eyes.
I hadn't even gotten as far as them wanting to come in. What did you do?
I kept the doors and windows locked. I knew if they came in, they would kill me, and they would have killed you, too, if you had let them into your car. Black-eyed woman. This incident happened a little over a year ago, and I've never forgotten it. My husband and I were on our way up north on I-75 during the afternoon. Luckily, it was not at our normal time in the evening. We have a little place in northern Lower Michigan, and often go up there for the weekends. As was our custom, we pulled in at our usual rest stop, and I went into the women's restroom. As I was preparing to leave the room, I suddenly noticed a thin, dark-haired woman standing alone and staring directly at me. I instantly felt a terrible sense of dread, as though there was something deeply unnatural about her. I then noticed the eyes which had been staring coldly at me, and they were completely black. I saw no color whatsoever, and no pupils. I felt an extremely strong need to get away from her as quickly as possible, as there was something quietly threatening about her. Her stare was devoid of any emotion other than something very cold and disconnected. My instant and unwavering feeling during this whole experience was that she was not human. I don't know what made me feel this so strongly, but it was my most singular, strongest sense while looking at her. There also was something almost predatory about her, as though she was homing in on prey while she stood there so still. I also had a strange sense of her feeling superior, or stronger in some way. Again, the sense of a predator watching its prey. I left as quickly as possible, showing as little reaction to her as possible. It seemed important, for some unknown reason, for me to act unaffected by her while in her presence. I felt a huge sense of relief as I got back into the car and left. I have to say that this was one of the most memorable brief experiences I've ever had around a person, especially a stranger. I have never been able to shake the unexplainable feeling that she wasn't human.
Black-eyed man in elevator. I am an executive of a bank in Australia. After being told about this site by a friend, I found to my surprise that a few people have had similar experiences regarding people with pitch black eyes. Unlike some, though, I didn't feel a sense of dread or a feeling that I was about to die. I felt more an awareness and discomfort, like when you see someone advance angrily toward you only to walk past you. Anyway, it was September 2nd, 2000, and one of the roles as an executive is you sometimes have to put in really late nights. My office was on the 5th floor and it was coming up at 12 in the morning. I was the only employee, as far as I know, on the first 5 floors apart from Ben, another fellow banker on my floor, and Stan, who is a security officer. I decided after finishing the files I was doing that I was going to go home. I said farewell to Stan, who more or less grunted and took the hall to the elevator. I then pressed the B2 level, as the B levels are the car parks. As I'm descending, the elevator flashes that it has been called to floor 2. I thought it was very strange, seeing as I said the only other 2 people on the first 5 floors were me, the banker, and Stan. Regardless, the elevator stops at floor 2 and in comes a tall man with more or less a black crew cut. The first thing I did was open my mouth to ask what sector he was from and who gave him permission, but as I looked into his eyes, they were entirely black. The pupils, the retinas, everything. I remember not really being spooked about his eyes. To be honest, I just thought he might have had a disability in his eyes. As the elevator slowly starts up moving back on route, he asked me where I was going. And I simply replied, home. He then asked why, and I more or less laughed and just said I want to go to sleep and see my wife. He then just muttered very softly, like he was talking to himself.
It must be nice to have a home.
I figured he was just being friendly and that he must be renting. As we got to B1, I realized he hadn't pushed the button on where he was going. So I asked, "Where are you going?" To which he replied rather angrily, looking at me with his creepy eyes.
Nowhere.
Feeling a little annoyed with his outburst that made zero sense at the time. I was glad to leave when we reached B2. As I walked to my car, which was roughly 10 meters from the lift, I saw that he didn't get out. In fact, he hardly moved. He just kept staring at me and where I was walking to. Starting to get freaked out that the guy was some warped out creep, I ran the little distance to my car and turned to see the lift was on an ascent up to floor 6. Feeling a little relieved, I drove up the ramps and coming to the security door I swiped the card and drove out onto the road. Now the real freaky part. As I drove down the street, all the lights were out, and this is in Sydney, city of New South Wales. Then I turn and guess who is walking just ahead of the car, our favorite black-eyed man. No need to say, I sped home, probably breaking 5 road laws. How could he have left the building and be ahead of me when he had no car? And went up to floor 6. It gets weirder. On the videotapes and records, there shows no one using the elevator at that time apart from me.
Black-eyed in Starbucks. The story of the black-eyed kids inspired me to send in my story because I think I ran into the adult version, though there was no feeling that I would die. It was a nice sunny day in November and I had been out running some errands. I decided to stop at Starbucks on my way home to get some tea. There were a lot of people at Starbucks, no surprise. I got my tea, headed out the door, had to stop and organize myself as my keys migrated to the bottom of the purse and I still had to get my wallet in. So I plopped the stuff down on an open table and tried to get my act together. I felt like I was being watched, so I turned around to give whatever to the perv that I assumed was watching me. And the smart aleck remark died in my mouth as I caught sight of him and made inadvertent eye contact. I should note here, I did not see anything unusual in his manner of dress. Jeans, black shirt, lightweight black jacket, no hat, no overcoat. Not unusual dress. His hair was almost black, but didn't look any darker than my boyfriend's hair. My boyfriend is of Japanese descent. His skin tone was a bit olive and pale but not overly so. It was the eyes and the aura coming off of him that scared me. The eyes, blacker than black, no white at all, wall-to-wall black, and I just felt a darkness around him. An evil. As I looked in his eyes, I somehow knew that was not a human soul occupying that body. And I felt that he knew that I knew that he was not human. Interesting side note, 3 open tables around the table he was sitting at were empty. And stayed empty. People would just come out the door, look in that direction, and leave. No one would sit near him. I got the feeling that he was amused by this. That he could keep humanity away and he was challenging me.
Are you going to run away too?
My reply was I am leaving because I was planning on leaving. All this was telepathic. I then broke eye contact, deliberately, and proceeded to get my stuff organized and walked back to my car. Somehow, I felt that it was important that I show no fear as he was still watching me. So I held it to a walk, a fast walk, but a walk. I got in my car and left. It spooked me pretty badly, but I now know that we are not alone in this world. We share our world with others, non-human.
BEK encounter. I'll give you the story. I live in Southern California, Encinitas to be exact. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happens here. The only haunting we have is an old theater that supposedly has a ghost that inhabits it after someone was murdered there. Personally, I never believed in the paranormal until about a week ago. I work at the local YMCA as a youth counselor. One night as I sat in the parking lot clearing room on the seat next to me for my friend to sit down, this kid comes up to the side of the car. Immediately as this kid gets near us, we can tell something is wrong. My friend just hopped into the back of the car and we lock all the doors. The kid didn't say anything, but before I realized it I had rolled down the window. When I got a closer look at the kid, I was alarmed at how young he looked. I'd say about 7 to 10 years old. He was your average very blonde white kid, pale skin, but he gave off a terrible aura of bad things. He told me to let him in the car, never giving a reason. I was compelled by some force to open the door, but my friend kept telling me, "There's no more room." The kid began to repeat this phrase back, sounding very angry. No more room, no more room. At this point he and I made eye contact. I saw that his eyes were fully black, no whites to them at all. He grabbed my arm through the window, and dug his fingernails into my forearm. His skin was cold. I shoved him from the window and shouted, "There's no more room," and slammed my foot on the accelerator. We drove over the curb and flattened a bush before leaving the parking lot. as we sped towards my friend's house we saw this kid twice, once at a fruit stand, and again at a red light. We sat in my friend's garage for about an hour before getting the courage to go inside. We immediately set about locking all the doors in the house and closing all the windows. We grabbed all the kitchen knives and placed them around the house so that we could get to them fast, a silly precaution because we both admitted we were either seeing things or we'd be dead if it came into the house. The next 2 days passed without incident. Then on a Friday night I was sitting at home watching a movie with my girlfriend. Quick side note, I own 3 cats, 2 who are extremely friendly, and 1 that is not so much. She never lets me pick her up or even pet her. The big friendly cat is curled up on my girl, and the one that is afraid of me is curled up on my lap. The little friendly one is nowhere to be seen. Which is normal, he's usually asleep on my bed, or on my desk. Anyways, it's maybe 2 in the morning and we're watching Labyrinth on the couch together when she hears something. I didn't, but she wants me to go check it out. I say it's probably nothing but go get my knife. After the experience with that kid I'm nervous as hell. I go out in my backyard and nothing's there. My neighbor is sitting in his lawn chair playing guitar, so I decide to go back in. We go back to watching the movie when there is a knock on the door. Not just 1 or 2, but a knock that you get when someone is angry with you, like when the government comes in all the movies. I looked out the peephole and see no one, so I opened the door. Standing there is a teenage kid, pale skin, jet black hair. I ask him if he needs help, and he told me he needed a telephone. This kid looks fairly straight edge, he looks like the type you can trust. I get no bad aura from him, and I'm about to let him in when I notice his eyes. Deep black, just like the kid in the parking lot. I slam the door in his face, and look out the peephole. I still see no one through it. I decided that going back to watching the movie is the best thing I can do right now. We finished the movie, and we're getting ready to go to bed when the phone rings. It's my neighbor on caller ID, so I answered it. He tells me he just chased some teenager out of my yard. I thank him and hang up. I have not had a run-in with either kid since. I have seen them on street corners when I am out driving, and once I saw the teenager watching me while I was at work. I work outside, he was leaning on the chain link fence. Tell my /x/, what did I see? Were these shadow people? I'm scared shitless. P.S. My cat did not come back. I'd like to know if some bastard got him, or if he still might be out there, or if these people got him.
Black-eyed kid. I am a 47-year-old woman. The day in question was a normal day for me. I am an apartment manager of over 20 years' experience and open my door to strangers every day. Sometimes I don't like the looks of the people that come to my door to see available apartments. But I will still make myself available to show the ready and empty apartments to rent. On this day, however, I was not willing to even step out of my office door to show to the very creepy young boy who had knocked at my door. He had come in the early afternoon and knocked on my office door. I opened the door to see who it was. He was a young boy of about 17 or 18. Approximately. He asked me about an open apartment for rent. I remember feeling very scared and shaken by his appearance. He did not look weird by his dress or such. It was his eyes. I remember feeling the hair on my neck stand up, and I was shaking just from looking in his eyes. I have never felt like this before in all the years I have done this job. I could not look him straight in the eyes. I felt like I was about to die. My instincts told me this. I noticed he was on a bicycle, not in a vehicle. He was not moving toward me or anything, but he was just waiting for me to invite him in or take him to the empty unit. Now, some people may think that I was just overreacting or something, but the eyes were completely black. Like there was no real pupil. He spoke normally to me, but I had to just shut the door in his face and get as far from him as I could. I felt like I was in extreme danger. Only because of the eyes. I think if I had looked any longer into them, I would have not been able to shut that door. I shook for hours after that. I called my daughter at work and told her about it. She told me about the black-eyed kids. I am still afraid of that image of his eyes. The black-eyed kids are some young kids that try to get people to invite them into their cars or homes, etc. And the people end up dead. There were 2 incidents that occurred in Portland, Oregon here that I heard about. I just tried to look up anything I could about them, but there isn't a lot of info on them. Just be warned, do not allow any kids with dark eyes inside your home or vehicles, no matter how young or persistent they are.
Soon after this, another member of the forums who happened to live in the same town / close by explained that he knew someone else who had a similar account, but hadn't heard from them again. He then proceeded to track down the mother of the missing person and spoke with her. Here is a retelling of the events. Okay, I got back from meeting David's mom. She was at first a little hesitant because she never met me before and the fact that I really didn't know her son all that well. So when we met, I just cut to the chase asking if David was making up these stories of little kids with black eyes. Her eyes lit up once I mentioned the BEKs and she looked around first and invited me inside to talk about it. She explained that when David was living there, they would have frequent visits from them, eventually resulting in her calling the cops. Apparently it went on for about 3 months, not every night but some weeks 3 or 4 visits and other weeks none at all. Once the cops were called, they patrolled in front of the house but saw nothing. At first she didn't believe David was telling the truth. Then after a few weeks David had increasingly black rings under his eyes from lack of sleep. She said she started to believe he was seeing something but she couldn't tell if it was real or just in his head. Then the following week she got a day off and she heard the door knock. When she went to check it there was nothing, and she thought it was just some neighborhood kids dinging and ditching. A few minutes later it happened again, and the same result. Then when it happened again she started to feel really scared, and this wasn't normal because she would usually get pissed off. She felt an overwhelming fear make her whole body shake as she went to the door. When she looked out, there was this young white child not older than 13. He had a very pale and white face and was wearing a gray hooded sweatshirt. The hood was pulled over his head. At first he looked very sad, with his head down a bit. It looked like he was in need of something. As soon as she opened her mouth to ask if there was anything he needed, the boy spoke, asking if David could come out and play. She was puzzled by this because David was 18 and wouldn't normally play with kids this young. She was surprised when she said, "David isn't here right now, but he might be home later." She usually wouldn't tell just anyone that information, especially since she was completely frightened. It was late and I started wondering for some reason why a young kid would be out roaming around. The kid grew a big grin and it quickly faded as he just asked, "Can I come in to wait for David?" She responded almost automatically, in almost a yell, "No." The kid then looked up at the peephole where the light can shine on his face and said, "Then will you let me use the phone?" This is when she saw his completely black eyes. Her hand threw the lock on the door suddenly and then put the bolt lock on and went to go phone for the police. She said she had never felt so terrified. Even though she didn't let him in, she felt like he was inside the house. And she wouldn't go look through the peephole again that night. When David did get home, she told she was sorry for doubting him. David would tell her on many occasions that they had been outside watching through the windows. And that they were following him. He couldn't sleep anymore and was constantly fidgety and paranoid. She said that she understood why. Her and her ex-husband discussed what was happening and they agreed it would be best for David to go live with him. She said that they came a few times after that and then they just stopped. The last time she saw one, it was 2 boys and they asked if David was there. She said, "He moved away and he won't be coming back." The 2 boys looked angry and said, "Let us in." She said no and left the door. They haven't been back yet. However, when I asked if I could have David's number, she refused to. I told her I understood and thanked her for her time. She then asked before I left if I believed her. Now keep in mind, even when this thread popped up I didn't think much about it because anyone could make up crap and I was skeptical, but after hearing her story I believe her. Okay/x/well, I met up with my friend, the one who was telling you guys about the BEK. He told me about it too, but with a bit more detail than he told you guys heard, or so he told me. I'm back and I'm fucking scared to hell. Just a note/x/ I wrote this all over the past hour or so. I've been too scared to actually do much else, and I had a lot to correct because of my hands shaking so much. I met up with him, we hung out, shit like that. He seemed different though. Kind of like freaked out differently. He was always darting his eyes back and forth, and I noticed that his hand was shaking a lot when he was holding a soda. I asked him what was up, and he said that the BEK sees him everywhere, and that he can't do anything without seeing it. That's right, a single BEK. He told me that the 3 he saw were not all different BEKs, they were all one in the same. Apparently they can shift their shapes at will. He said that on the 5th visitation by the presumed BEK, it asked him why he had not let it in the previous 4 times, proving that the BEK was a single entity. Anyways, he said he couldn't do anything without thinking he had seen it. When he went outside, it was watching him. He said it was everywhere. He said that yesterday he couldn't even turn on his computer. He was so scared. The only reason he hung out with me was because he thought that maybe there would be some security with large numbers of people around. I didn't see at the time we hung out at the mall, so I presumed that his assumption was right. So we hung out there for about 2 hours, when we decided to head back to his house for some gaming and stuff. It was a big fucking mistake. I swear, I was scared shitless tonight after going to his house. We went to his house and started playing some 360, nobody else was home, his parents were out and his brother was having a sleepover elsewhere, and some weird shit started happening. A quick rumbling, and then a power outage. Looked out the window to the house next door, and the lights were functioning there. He grabbed a flashlight and went to grab his camera, a pic for you guys, but when he came back down with his camera, he said a piece of the ceiling fell down on his desk and shattered the lens. It sounds like bullshit/x/, but it isn't. This camera was as good as a piece of garbage now. Instead, he took the flashlight and shined it outside the window to his backyard, and that BEK was fucking there. It was a small, young, short black-haired girl this time. But those fucking eyes, you couldn't tell who they were looking at just from a glance, but I could just feel this thing looking through me and Encinitas. Encinitas went over to the glass sliding door and opened it, but left the screen door closed. I could tell he had nearly shit himself. He was completely pale white. He asked her what she wanted, and she said in a sweet-as-sugar voice, "I have been asking to come in so many times, who won't you let me in? I just need to use the phone." That fucking voice was the most hollow, empty thing I have ever heard, regardless of the sweetness coming from it. Encinitas looked at me. I think I was hiding behind his couch or something like that, and when he turned back around he slammed the door in the BEK's face, screaming, "No you fucking thing." When he did, the BEK started running around looking for more open places to try and coax Encinitas to let her in, but all the window shades were drawn. After several minutes of rustling from all around our house, everything died down. And fucking went to hell. The entire house started rumbling, and from outside we heard a voice. I can't even fucking describe it, demonic. Say, "I will kill anybody whom you have told about me if you do not let me in." And then the rumbling stopped, just suddenly. Both of us were, needless to say, scared out of our minds, but decided instead to get the hell out of there. We took his car, and bolted out of there. I was driving because he was pretty much in the fetal position, and I was near insanity because I was imagining I was gonna be maimed in my sleep by a fucking black-eyed, pale as hell kid. We went back to my house, and he's sitting here, now, moaning gibberish and laying on the floor. I've been looking out my window every 5 minutes, and I see a different kid every time, but with those same fucking black eyes, watching my room. I lost my camera years ago. So I can't get a pic for you. Yet. Tomorrow if I can, I'm gonna go and buy a cheapo one. Well, Encinitas here is finally turning sane again. I guess he'll be staying at my place tonight. He seems really tired though, he's probably gonna fall asleep right here on my floor, and I don't think he'd be up for questioning anyways. I think the BEK is gonna stay outside my room all night, waiting for me to let it in. I'm just gonna ignore it. Fuck/x/ this is scaring the shit out of me.
Black-eyed kids encounter. So, I went to my grandparents' house today to do some work in their garden. My grandfather was involved in an accident and can't do it anymore. So, after clearing out some weeds and other crap from the garden, I came back in for lunch. And then we got talking, several days earlier. Late in the evening, someone rang the side doorbell. My grandparents' bungalow has both a front door and a side door out from the kitchen, and they tend to attribute the side doorbell as being someone they know. My grandmother opens the door, and there is a young girl standing outside. She asked to use the phone. You know this part, I think. Gran first asks why this girl is out so late. She eludes the question. Then she asks her who she wants to phone. She says her father, in a city about 60 miles away. In spite of her suspicion, she nearly lets the girl in. But before she can, my grandfather comes into the kitchen. And I reckon he pretty much saved them both. He's blind, you see. He went up to talk with this girl, asked her the same questions and then some, and simply said no. My grandmother would be the first one of the two to help out a kid. But I guess, in a way, my grandfather saw that something was wrong. Once they mentioned the child, I asked them all sorts of questions and got the whole story. Annoyingly, my grandmother didn't notice the kid's eyes, and of course my grandfather couldn't. Do you think this is how they work their magic?
Black-eyed waitress first. I just want to say that I have never been a believer in the supernatural, paranormal, etc. I think that everything has a logical explanation that maybe only seems bizarre because of a certain kind of overexcitement that many people have about an experience from the other side, or what have you. There is absolutely no explanation for what I'm about to share with you, and it absolutely scares the crap out of me. Just recounting this is giving me a really creepy feeling that I don't think I'll be able to shake, maybe ever. About 3 years ago, I was sitting in a local coffee shop in upstate New York during a little road trip. The restaurant was empty except for me and the night waitress. She was really pleasant and talked a lot. She was offering places to check out while I was in town and seemed amazingly astute. In fact, she seemed almost prescient, even guessing my age almost to the day and month, and even certain things that I was actually planning to do the next day. It was so lighthearted, I thought I really lucked out by meeting a easygoing, smart young lady quite out my normal way. At closing time, she went to the back to, I guess, put some cash in the safe or something. As I was sitting there wondering what time I wanted to get up and hit the road again the next day, I momentarily thought I might even invite her for a few hours of R&R. I decided instead to just remember the store, and next time I passed through the area, to remember to stick my head in and say, "Hi." No reason. I just wanted to play it cool and not seem over-anxious at very first. So, I got up and knocked on the door in the back of the coffee shop where she went in. At this time, there were only 2 dim lights in the main eating area, and barely any lights in the back room where she was. I opened the door. This woman who I just finished talking to was standing facing me, just standing there in the back of this dark room when I opened the door. Her skin was suddenly a clammy, cracked olive color, and her eyes were just black. I mean, no white at all. Her eyes and mouth was open really wide, and she was screaming in the most spine-chilling sounds, something I couldn't understand, but it definitely wasn't sounds of goodwill. I literally screamed myself, and she started moving from one spot to the other through the room. Not running, just moving. Her clothes now looked all old, and she moved so fast. The back of the room must have been 15 feet or so back, and she just darted from one side of the back of the room, still facing me, to the other side, at an impossible speed. Then she ran directly straight at me as I was now standing away from the door in the middle of the restaurant. I got the hell out of there, and jumped in my car, still seeing her nightmarish face in the restaurant, darting it seemed to every window at this impossible velocity. The worst thing was, as I tore out of the parking lot, I looked in my rear-view mirror, and she was sitting in the back seat, still with that nightmarish expression, still screaming. Then she just vanished as I was panicking around. Just gone. I don't know what that was that spoke to me in the restaurant that day, but I know that it wasn't a prank. I swear at night sometimes I see her shadow moving in the dark in my room, just grinning a really ugly, evil grin. I haven't slept properly since.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.